That shut us up.
Okay, good to go.
Great. Hi, everyone. This is the May meeting of Manhattan Community Board 4's Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee. We do not have any presentations tonight. Oh, excuse me. I should say by order of the mayor still. This is our last month, right, Janine? By order of the mayor. We are totally virtual, which will change next month, which we will be hybrid. So we do not, as I was saying, we do not have any presentations tonight. So we just have two committee discussions. But before we start, I would like to welcome Josephine, who is our new WPE member. She's smart and got out of HHHHHHS and came to Parks. I'm kidding. But now she's, I think it was a scheduling conflict, right, Josephine? Because they changed their meeting times.
Yes, but I'm very happy to be here, especially at this time. So many exciting things going on. So thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. This is great. So I guess we will jump right into it. If
Leslie,
oh, go ahead, Marty. You go ahead because I'm gonna get my notes. So go ahead.
Well, get your notes. Since we were just talking about the change in the meeting format, I hope not to be present at every once in a while I will be, but I don't know how many of the others of you plan to show up in person. It's hybrid arrangement. And as I understand it, half of us need to be, a quorum needs to be in person in order for that to work. Isn't that the way, isn't that what I think I heard?
Yeah, so half plus one.
So my question is, how many are planning to stay hybrid and how many are planning to go to those meetings? Because we're gonna have to adjust to it.
Janine,
as much as possible.
Say again, Tina.
To try to attend as much as possible in person.
So how many, if you show by hands, tell me how many plan to attend as much as possible. And we need 8, I think.
Are you asking how many of us plan to attend in person?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Janine, could I ask you to clarify what the voting situation is? You can vote regardless of whether you're in person or virtual?
Yes, you'll be able to vote both ways.
Okay.
So
Roberta, do you have a question? You okay?
No,
I only
my
saw 5
understanding from
hands.
Jesse was that you would not be able to vote if you were not present. You would be able to engage in discussion, but you would not actually be able to vote. But I could be wrong about that.
I'll have to double check then, because we're gonna meet like soon for regarding this whole hybrid situation. So I'll double check with that. But my understanding was that you could vote if you were not in person, but I'll let you all know.
And then in theory, though, if there was an instance where the committee didn't want to take up a vote on anything, it could have a fully hybrid meeting because there are no votes, maybe.
Again, I'll have to
Not
get
here,
that
but-
kid.
Oh, I think we have to meet. The whole point is we have to meet in person
Yeah, I think it has to be in person.
in some fashion.
It has to be in some public space, but my understand, like publicly accessible space.
Board office.
Yeah, so all our meetings as of now will probably be in our board office, unless I hear otherwise. But yeah.
But as I understand it, a quorum needs, this is my understanding, and I could be wrong, Roberta. The committee needs to have a quorum to function. The quorum needs to be in person. And those of us like me that have this predilection to not being in person, going to have, if we don't make quorum, unless I'm out of town, we're going to have to reevaluate what we do. I have found it very convenient not to have to travel to these meetings.
I think why don't we save that for if we want to have a longer discussion on this, maybe we should go according to the agenda and do old new business.
You got your notes.
or I think we can also cross that bridge when we get to it. I think that, at least at first, people might be excited to be in person. It might get old fast, but I think a lot of people will, as the show of hands, will be in person to begin with. But we can further discuss, if there are any more questions about that. Is that okay with everybody?
Yep.
All right, we only have 2 agenda items other than old new business. The first one is, it's a little land use zoning wonky, but it's very environment centric. So we wanted to discuss it amongst this committee. Well, let me get into it. So it's the city of yes. It's the citywide zoning text amendment. It's new zoning rules. And these proposed zoning changes are really to support the changing landscape of energy infrastructure, specifically green infrastructure. And just for a little bit of background, we'll do like a little 10-year thing here. About 10 years ago, the city adopted a set of zoning changes to accommodate forward-thinking revisions, and that was called Zone Green. And that was what they thought back then was needed for these forward-thinking changes. And then in 2016, the city built a roadmap to achieve our carbon neutrality goals by about 2050. So move ahead a few years, 2019, in line with the Paris Agreement, the New York City Council enacted the Climate Mobilization Act. So this was more geared towards changing and adding local law, like the LL laws, with regards to building parameters. And then to support these goals and changes, New York State voters passed the Environmental Bond Act, making another $4.2 billion available to support these environmental projects. And I'm listing all this because we're kind of gathering all these little changes to where we are now, and all these elements coming together to hopefully produce a cleaner, greener way of operating. And you could see actually how this technology is changing. I mean, just 10 years ago, they had new zoning changes, and now 10 years later, they're trying to enact another set of zoning changes to keep up with this green technology. So I sent around a little Cliff Notes version. And before I go into that, there's just one change I wanted to make. It's under the first one, energy and rooftop solar. I made a mistake. I said there was a provision for equipment over 4 feet of permitted height must be 6 feet from street walls and cannot cover. I don't know if anyone has their document open. That is the current. That's not the proposed change. I'm sorry, that is the current ones. The proposed change, I believe, is taking that away. So just if you're looking at it, just make a change in that. I apologize for that. So these zoning changes, in order to support green infrastructure, they broke it down in 4 categories: energy, buildings, transportation, and waste. And I don't know if anyone got a chance to maybe skim through it, but we can go, if you want, we can go just maybe group by group. We don't have to really get into the nitty-gritty of it. The reason why we're doing this is because city planning is coming to CB4 to present this City of Yes zoning changes or proposed zoning changes on Monday. And they are presenting to a joint meeting of both land use committees, Chelsea Land Use and Hell's Kitchen Land Use. So since they're only presenting at one meeting, one committee meeting, both transportation and us, WPE, we are going to talk amongst ourselves and then kind of put forward our thoughts and recommendations at that meeting on Monday. And since it is obviously environmentally centric, we might have some things to say about it. Now, obviously, or maybe not obviously, our take will be a little different than maybe some of the land use, which are, people which are more technical. I guess we're coming from it from a more environmental frame of mind. But before I get into any of this, or Marty, if you want to say anything, does anyone have any questions about kind of why we're doing this, or what the city is proposing, or the format or anything before we kind of get into some of these line items? No? Marty, anything?
I have some comments as you go through.
Okay. And I don't want to get too buried in this, right, guys? I mean, these are like zoning changes that are, some of them are very specific. I'll leave it to land use, which will probably go line by line. But I wanted to just consolidate some of these points of information to see if anything was a red flag, anything stuck out. Like if we start with the energy, rooftop solar, this is going to be a big deal because there are buildings, or what the city is saying, people want to install solar, but because the current zoning, the zoning language might make it prohibitive. So what they want to do is raise the height of solar equipment, solar roof equipment, to allow the solar panels to kind of go a little higher, to fit the necessary structures, things of that nature. Now, land use sent me some notes, and they're going to say currently there's this 6-foot setback rule, and they might fight to keep that 6-foot setback rule. The city is saying, and some people who deal with solar panels are saying, this setback rule is making it a little tough to install the amount of solar panels needed for the maximum amount of energy that can be, I guess, gained. So I don't know if we go down, same thing, the solar parking canopies, they're allowing canopies over parking areas, which they didn't before. Standalone solar, they're allowing for support systems, for green energy and generators, which they did not before. So it's a lot of this text. And I'll stop there because that's the solar portion of it. Does anyone have any questions? And if I'm rushing through, the reason why I'm going a little quickly, because I don't want to think that we want to bog ourselves down in every single line item. But if anyone had any questions or thoughts about the solar changes, David.
Yeah, I have real problems with it. You know, the whole purpose of zoning, and anyone who's taken the zoning 101 classes knows about the equitable building downtown, and, you know, sky exposure and light and air. And this really is kind of equivalent to adding a story to a building in terms of blocking out the visible sky and casting shadows. And as an architect, I think the notion that they could bear the weight of the solar panels on existing exterior walls is pretty iffy. You know, it looks like they're talking about the supports for the solar panels coming down on top of parapet walls, which are not necessarily designed to be load bearing. And they're also very vulnerable to wind forces. They're not really made to resist overturning from wind for more than their own surface area. And when you're talking about an array of solar panels, that's really going to catch the wind. And at other points, that array is going to need to come down on central parts of the roof anyway. So, you know, I think it's a little bit structurally implausible, as well as really not a very good idea in terms of the intent of zoning.
So where would you suggest, I mean, where would you suggest the solar panels go?
Well, over the central part of the roof. And, you know, I don't know for sure what these things weigh, but again, wind load is a really substantial element, especially at the top of a building. So conventional rooftop equipment generally doesn't rest on the roof itself because it makes roofing difficult. It rests on sort of steel beams that are elevated a little bit off the roof. It's called dunnage. You know, I don't know if a new dunnage system would need to be put in to support these rooftop arrays, but I think the idea that it can just bear on the parapet walls is a little bit naive structurally.
So it's my understanding, unless someone knows differently, it's my understanding that these solar panels and these usually when it goes on rooftops go on like somewhat like a canopy, whether that canopy is 1 foot, 2 foot, you know, they're allowing higher canopy because of there's going to be mechanical already existing mechanical structures. FDNY needs to get underneath them. That's another reason. But it's my understanding that these canopies will have to, obviously, they can't be put on something that's not load bearing. It has to go according to existing permitting. So you can't just put something on a structure, kind of like you can't put if you want a rooftop garden, you can't do it unless your building can hold it, right? So I don't know if, David, what do you say? You know what I mean? What would you suggest as far as, it's my understanding that is already understood in the permitting, no?
That it's got to be structurally supported,
Yeah,
but
correct.
I think the argument that it's going to be cheaper or encourage more solar arrays because you can rest on the parapet is a false argument. I don't think that's really going to have a lot of bearing on the practicality of installing these things. And then there's the zoning deficit of, adding something that's like an additional half story, cutting down light that gets down to the street. And even that has an environmental impact. We talk a lot about the so-called donut hole in the middle of like row house blocks in the Chelsea Historic District, and how we're trying to make sure that that remains green and cultivates trees. You're blocking natural light that could help trees grow. It's and then do you really want to see that at the top of every building you look at? And some buildings are better compositions than others. Some it wouldn't detract from too much, but it really is a big visual impact, and it's an impact in terms of light and air, of zoning basics. And as I said, I think the structural argument is pretty weak that they're making.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Hi. So David touched on a little bit of what I was going to ask about too, which was the purpose of the setbacks originally. Like if it had I think you said a 6-foot setback, and then they were going to take that out. Normally when there's a zoning ordinance that has a setback, it's for a reason. And I was just wondering what that reason is and what has changed besides just, oh, we want to put up more solar. Because like David was talking about, just the being able to see it from the street. I think when I read through, said that it was going to allow a height of 15 feet underneath. And so if you have 15 feet high right up to the edge of the building, it is going to make a huge difference in terms of just sight. And then again, to echo what David was saying, just sunlight. And I don't want to repeat too much of what was already said, but my main question is, would be to ask what exactly has changed that would allow to take out those setbacks?
So I think David, you would, oh, sorry, go ahead, Maury.
I think I know the answer to that. And I'm going to engage David. The setbacks were about not having the solar panels that were not canopied high off the roof permit the fire department, if it needed to, move around the roof. The 15-foot height covering the entire roof would eliminate the setbacks because the fire department could move under canopy. I think that's the answer for the setbacks, unless somebody knows different.
I just one additional piece to add is when you eliminate the setback requirements for the canopies, you're able to move the load bearing pieces further out. So they're on the load bearing walls. And so that's DCP's justification for why this is particularly useful here for the canopies. Of course,
any installation is going to have an engineer architect look at it to see what the load bearing capabilities of whatever goes up there is. And so I think that the biggest piece of what David was saying, and Jennifer too, I think, is I'll personalize it. I am offended by all the crap that's going up in the city. I hate these sliver buildings. My wife and I walk around and we go cuckoo about them. I'm a strong supporter of keeping the donut hole with light and air. However, I think I am not going to like seeing 15 feet more on all of these buildings. But because solar energy is such an important new source of energy, and wasting all the roofs in the city to not have solar energy on it, I actually feel that I would take, if it were solely for solar, I don't know what the weeds are in all these documents. If developers start to manipulate that in a way that it becomes for something other than solar, I will be offended. But if it's solely for solar, I would be much happier with it. I just come off of a meeting which is still going on of the Penn South Environment Committee, and they were talking about the difficulty of putting solar on the roofs at Penn South. Well, without the 15-foot height, the roof coverage would be very small, and the available energy that would come from the solar collectors wouldn't be very large. Penn South has an additional problem that if it has the 15-foot canopy, it's still going to have to figure out how to get the energy from the roofs to the distribution point, which is a powerhouse, or somebody else has to come up with an idea as to how to deal with that. But if only 25% of the roof can be covered, or even 50% of the roof, then the energy that would be gotten from it in the Penn South case makes the project not so feasible. However, 100% of roof coverage, which is an eyesore, I think, but a necessary one.
So you hit on a point, Marty, that the city is saying why these zoning changes are necessary, because of the current zoning regulations, the coverage of solar paneling they can put up, it's not worth it for them. It's not producing the amount of energy, like you said. It would produce maybe 25 or 50%, but if they can put more solar, it would be quote unquote worth their while type of thing.
The other side of that is that canopies are the most expensive way of installing solar.
So I was just looking back. So the reason why they're raising the height is because they're saying that solar advocates and practitioners, people who put these in, is that the rules now encourage panels to be low to the roof, right? Lower, not higher. They're raising it, but then now you can't go over existing mechanical structures. The FDNY, like you said, that we were saying earlier, can't get underneath it. So all these changes they're saying are necessary, the raising, to accommodate for all of these now different, I guess, functions of what's going on in the roof. Jennifer, is your hand up? Do you have another comment, or is that from?
No, I was just going to follow up with what Marty said. Thank you for explaining the firefighters being able to walk around versus being able to walk under, and that being part of the reason. I do think that, I do still have hesitation. I know that solar is really important, and I know that making everything greener is really important, but I do still have hesitations on like the full effects of what changing the sunlight to the ground below will be if you have solar all the way out to the edge at a 15-foot height, because it does make all the buildings that have it does make them all effectively taller at that point.
Roberta.
So I did want to echo kind of the Marty's thoughts on broad principle. I think that it certainly makes a lot of sense to sacrifice at least some aesthetics and some potential light, so long as, of course, health and safety of the individuals living in buildings and people who live in the community are preserved. I did want to note, just because I didn't read the entire EIS cover to cover, but I did note that they noted that the shadows impacts would likely be fairly small. I think that we could probably unpack the EIS a little bit more. Obviously, they're conducting an EIS for a text amendment citywide, so I'm sure that there are one-off individual local instances. And so I think that, but I was heartened to see that because I do know that that is a concern. I think there are some places where it's a bigger concern than it is in other places. You could very much see like the Clinton Special District where you have a lot of these tenement buildings, and light and air and height are more significant issues, and they are, on some of the avenues, like 8th Avenue, for example, where, this could be a potential issue. So I would be really interested in understanding, and I imagine someone will ask about this in the land use meeting, how this interacts with the special district and what this means for smaller tenement buildings and their access to light and air. Like on principle, I am less concerned and think that it's a worthwhile trade. There may be some particular instances that are worth discussing. And then finally, I know we have like some historic pieces. I know LPC is considering their own additional rules around solar. And I'm curious like how this would work with this particular text amendment. And I don't know if we'd be able to ask that, but I'll try and tune into the land use meeting.
Thank you, Roberta. Brad?
I'd like to see a design competition and regarding these things. And maybe we could make a statement in New York with, 4 different models, or, I would like to see an aesthetic artistry to it. And I'd like to say that we'd like to see some real rendering, some competition, some real people looking at the design of these things. I'm on board with everybody else. We want it. There's nuance to any tax amendment, which I think is going to be required. But one more question. I was reading the notes, about the wind turbines. Those are 15 feet high. And I'm just curious on the sound on that. But like a design competition for that too. Are they going to use both? So, but I'm glad to hear it.
Thank you,
Now
Brad.
the guys on Hudson River Park can't claim they can't do it.
Thanks, Brad. We will get to the wind turbine part as well. Gwen? Oh, you're on mute, Gwen.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was, I have a comment also on the wind, so I'll wait.
Okay, great. I think, so it's interesting. I know I was talking to, I think, Joe Restuccia today and Carrie Keenan, who is the co-chair of Chelsea Land Use, asking their opinions and the other land use people. And they said that the setback rule would definitely, it could be a visibility issue. So I think we, as the Environment Committee, though, like, what is the give and take, right? What are we, where is that line drawn? Like, what do we sacrifice as far as visual? I mean, I'm not going to equate this, but I don't know if you guys are familiar with the conversation going down the eastern side of Long Island with the big wind turbines that were supposed to be put in there, or are supposed to be put in there. And the people who live out there are saying it's going to be an eyesore. All these, it's going to ruin my view. I don't want to see them. It's not exactly apples to apples because solar panels on top of buildings have additional effects as well, not just the visual. But as far as the visual piece, I like seeing solar panels, to be honest with you. It makes me feel good when I see solar panels. But anyway, Roberta.
I did just want to add, my understanding is that these solar panels could then help all these buildings meet their obligations under local law 97 for decarbonization. And so in that regard, like, there are challenges, there are real challenges, but basically telling a bunch of buildings, including co-ops, condos, rentals, like, you have to decarbonize, and then limiting the ability for them to do so, it's challenging. And and I say this because there is the potential for fines and enforcement. And, if the city is not going to do this, or we don't want to do this, we should figure out, what are some other ways that we can promote decarbonization and help buildings meet their benchmark standards for greenhouse gas emissions so that they're not being fined. And so if this is one way to do that, great. If there are other ways that we can promote, also great.
You bring up a really good point, Roberta, because as I was reading through some of the city's comments, is that that was a lot of it, like people want to make the changes, but the current zoning is restrictive. And buildings can't meet certain goals that they want to meet, or that the city, like you said, is asking them to meet. If there's, for instance, there was a note that said, I guess some non-residential buildings wanted to put rooftop gardens in, or greenhouse, green rooftops in. And I think something along the lines of, some of the zoning was so restrictive that only 2 people applied, or only 2 got accepted that's how so now I think as they're moving forward, they want to put in these new zoning rules to allow that. So I think the solar, I mean, there are other, listen, as we go down the list, I think it's going to be, I think this is going to be one of the big points is going to be the rooftop solar. So I don't know where this committee will come out on this, or what our quote unquote recommendation is, even if it's a casual recommendation. Katie?
There's a piece that Roberta raises about rooftop solar being eliminating, meeting the requirements of the local laws. And I have to say that's not clear to me. They may be necessary, but they may not be sufficient.
They may not be sufficient. I think, but it's about a mix, how do you get there? And
it's a piece. I think she's saying it's a piece. It could be, to get the benchmark, to get to that mark.
So the question that you asked, Leslie, and hopefully the next 2 speakers will work on it, is what kind of position does this committee want to take on rooftop solar?
Katie?
I just wanted to add in regards to design and what an actual solar canopy could look like. If you check out brooklynsolarworks.com, they're really doing a lot of these solar canopies, and I have seen them in person at their headquarters in Brooklyn, and it really is an interesting look, and I don't find it to be offensive, but maybe these are people we would want to talk to if you wanted to delve deeper into it. That's all.
Thanks, Katie. Josephine?
I just want to go back to something that Roberta had said about fines and enforcement. And I'm just a little bit concerned about, of course, I imagine the federal government is paying for this, or at least saying that they're paying for this, but I just can't believe that there aren't not going to be some costs that are going to come down on the owners of these buildings. So when you're looking at tenements or low income areas, what protections are they going to have? If these buildings become more expensive, then we're going to see people being displaced because costs are going up. So I'm really concerned about this from an equity standpoint. I mean, I totally believe that this is a great plan. I think that a lot of it still needs to be thought through. And you guys are very super smart, and I love listening to this conversation. However, I just want to also keep in mind from an equity standpoint, how are people, how is everyone going to be able to afford this? And I don't want people to get left out or displaced because of the climate gentrification, if you will. Thank you.
Roberta?
So I don't want to pretend that I have the full answer to Josephine's question. I think it's important. I think it was a big, question around local law 97 drafting and the sort of carve outs that exist. My understanding is there are some carve outs for particularly rent stabilized housing. Do not quote me on the very specifics there. So there is some way to control costs there. There is a really large amount of NYSERDA money, but local, largely federal money for this work. And then one thing that I have heard from operators is that going to a form of energy like solar does decrease their operating costs. So while there is a capital expenditure associated with a solar, it then over a sort of longer term has the ability to limit the effects of variable electricity and gas prices. And then the other thing that I would add is just, it is not, I personally don't believe that it is helpful to leave, I guess, lower income communities out of the like electrification conversation, because we know of some of the issues with gas stoves and like the health risks that they pose, particularly to children. And so if there is a way to help push people in that direction, I think it is helpful. I understand that the concerns are there. That would be how I would talk about them. But I think if we do write a letter, it's certainly something important to bring up.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Do we have any, what are we thinking about, if anything? I mean, I guess I can, does the setback or the take away of the setback, is that so extremely bothersome that we want to keep a setback? When I say we, I'm talking just WPE. You know, that could this is just what we're going to, like I said, softly recommend to land use, or strongly recommend. It depends. Roberta, is that from before? Or is that for now?
This is
Go ahead.
now. So I don't want to pretend to speak for the committee. I've heard like a lot of interest in it and support. We have a lot of concerns, and I think it might be appropriate to memorialize an interest in the idea because of its incredible benefits, but then to memorialize the various concerns that have been put forth here. You know, I think the concerns about things like climate gentrification or light and air are real, but I think it would also be helpful to have experts speak to those, and to have, you know, those questions asked, so we're not speculating.
Jennifer?
Hi. So as basically Roberta, what she just said, that I had concerns before, and it's just mainly that I wanted a little bit more information about how the changes to light and air were taken into account, and just a little more information what that would look like. What does it look like for street trees? How does it change? I don't know, just basically to see if it's just that we're saying, well, we don't care, we just need it for solar to make sense on the rooftop, or if it's been taken into consideration.
Okay, does anyone else, we can move on, but does anyone else have any? I think we kind of understand. I think we as the environmental committee understand that there's going to be a give and take, and maybe the visual might be a little bit of a sacrifice, but for, as Roberta and Marty was saying, the benefits would outweigh, I guess, those detriments that we talked about, or possible perceived detriments. I don't know. Does that sound fair to you? But then with the concerns that I think David brought up, Jennifer brought up, will be taken into consideration. Gwen?
I just was wondering, do we have any sort of drawing of what the installations would look like, including any piping that goes to them and that kind of thing?
I mean, I think, so it's not one size fits all.
No, I know, but
I believe, I mean, I can look up, I can send you or send the committee. There are, I mean, these solar canopies are not unusual. You know, they're in the suburb, they're all over the country. It's just that it's now going to be on buildings for, it's just zoning require, you know, we're talking about zoning, but I can, they pretty much look fairly similar. At least the ones I've seen. Katie, do you have, I guess maybe you're talking about the ones
I
in
just wanted to
Brooklyn?
jump in. Leslie, I sent you the link for Brooklyn Solar Works, but Gwen, if you just go to brooklynsolarworks.com, you can see images of what's being installed on, you know, similar brownstone buildings to the tenements we have, but in Brooklyn.
I just did it. It's worth the trip.
okay, I'll try it. Thank you.
Katie, thank you so much. Okay, let me move my tabs. I think the other ones, like the solar parking, so just remember, guys, this is citywide. So a lot of this stuff is really not going to pertain to, you know, community board 4 district. Like, you know, garages or single, you know, family housing. So we can go through a lot of this, but I do want to hit on number 4 here on the first part, which was the onshore wind. That will be easier to develop wind turbines along the city's waterfront. This is not in the water, I don't believe, the way the language is. This is actually on land, in the waterfront area, and it's going to allow considerations for taller turbines. And this is to combat the problem they're having. Again, when it's not as tall, they can't generate as much power. It's not as effective. They're trying to get as much power as they can by harnessing as much wind as they can. And obviously, if you get a little taller, that's how they do that. I don't know if anyone I know Brad wanted and Gwen wanted to make a point to that, but I don't know if they wanted to add.
Well,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would only say that I have seen them in lots of configurations, and I've sometimes they actually, when they build the building, they put them all up the entire building, the smaller ones, and it's just part of the way the building looks. So I mean,
the wind turbines?
Yes, the wind turbines. So what I'm saying is there are all sorts of ways of installing them. And the only thing that I know of that people have that much trouble with is when they try to go with an interesting design, you know, because it's not a proven thing and it usually doesn't put out as much electricity as they thought and that kind of thing.
Marty?
But I mean, they're safe. I'm sorry. You can put your arm in one, which I have done, and all you'll get is a little bruise out of it.
I have 2 concerns. I'm in favor of it, but I have 2 concerns. One concern is the aesthetic one. I don't know how to solve that. The higher turbines will likely produce more electricity, and they will likely have larger blades that may, in fact, not be so gentle on your arm if you
right
enough to climb up 50 feet and stick your arm in it. But I don't think Glenn qualifies for that. She's not saying that. And the second is that birds don't see them, and so I don't know if this is a developing technology or not, but there needs to be some sound emission or some kind of an emission that scares birds away from these things. And I know that that's in some development, but I don't have any idea where it is.
Matt?
So this is kind of making me think about like the Army Corps of Engineers and their proposal on the west side to build a wall. And I think we're sort of in a unique location where Hudson River Park, you know, is our waterfront. I don't have any issues necessarily with the aesthetic, like Leslie, as you were saying. I also kind of like seeing solar panels. I don't mind seeing wind turbines, but I think with Hudson River Park being such a major stakeholder on the west side waterfront, it would be important to just sort of get a better understanding from them, you know, how that would impact park use and locations where these would go. So I would just want to make sure that they're involved in any conversation regarding wind turbines on the waterfront.
Good point, Matt. Jennifer?
Yeah, I was just gonna speak to the bird comment earlier, that previously I used to work in wind at a utility scale size, so like not one off, and so we always had environmental specialists that had to do reports. We had that with solar as well, that they'd go through and evaluate. And I think that's where a lot of the questions that I had were coming from before, is when you take these projects from utility scale, they're huge, that are out in rural areas, and you bring them into the city. Basically, I think my question is, do we have somebody that's accounting for those effects, like on birds or on trees? Or it comes from the background with the environmental reports that we would always get for these projects. And so normally they would actually have an idea of how many birds were, it sounds awful, but how many birds were expected to not make it through these turbines per given year. And so I'm just wondering one off. I'm not as familiar with doing it residentially with wind or with solar. And so I was just wondering one off what that looks like as far as, because turbines do make noise, what that looks like when just, so yeah, again, I'm very much in support of wind and solar and all renewables, but just wondering how it affects it when it's right on our doorstep as opposed to in a more rural area.
Points well taken. Brad, I'm guessing your hand is up from before, but I just want to double check. We can move on, I guess, unless there are any strong feelings about the wind turbines further.
Just one note, I to Jennifer's point, I did look at the environmental impact assessment. It did not indicate any particular assessment done with regard to wildlife, and that my sort of understanding is relative to buildings and communications towers, power lines. The effect of wind turbines on birds is relatively negligible, which is not to say that it is zero and that we should just build things, but there is, I wouldn't single out wind turbines in a way that I would versus like other buildings. There may be other concerns, but just that specific wildlife concern, I just personally think it's lesser than other new construction that we experience. But the environmental impact assessment document that we have doesn't speak to that specifically.
Jennifer?
Oh, yeah, I think I completely agree that within the city environment, that birds aren't going to be that much of a concern with the wind turbines. I didn't realize, sorry, I must have missed it. I didn't realize that there was an environmental impact document with what we got sent.
It is in the Dropbox.
Oh, okay. I clicked the links, I think, clicked the documents that we got. So yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. My only other thing about the wind turbine would probably be the noise and effect that would have on the surrounding neighbors.
Thank you, Jennifer. Oh, Gwen, go ahead.
As to the noise, I used to sleep under one. So it's not that bad, but it does depend on how big they are.
And remember, this is waterfront. This is not by the, this is not the residential. This is on the waterfront. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Good point, Gwen. Okay, let's move on. So this next one is, I think it's a little bit, well, let me see what people think. It's the energy storage system. I know Carrie flagged for us that there might be some issues that the land use committees might have because I guess it's as of right, there'll be no oversight where these often, and I'm reading from her notes, very large systems will be placed. And I guess it's kind of the equivalent of, I know, mechanical equipment, or at least where these energy hubs are, right? Like the storage of the energy hubs. And I guess without community input, we could potentially lose open spaces where this is what Carrie's writing, where these would be placed. I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on this, or Gwen.
It's mostly what you're talking about. I'm sorry. Would you say what you were that concern was again?
Absolutely. So these are the energy storage systems.
Okay. So
What the green infrastructure equipment is considered, like similar to electric utility like to store the energy. I know the concerns that Carrie was saying, or that Chelsea Land Use might have, is that there might not be oversight where these large systems or somewhat large systems will be placed.
The main size, I think, I don't know about the big ones as much, but is batteries. You have to, have batteries for whether it's solar or wind, because there are times they're not going to run in either one of them. But to balance the loads out and all kinds of things, but it's mostly just big batteries we're
To
talking.
capture, it's like it's capturing and storing.
Right.
Yeah. Marty?
Those batteries, I read somewhere, I can't find it right now, will still have to be approved by the fire department. And the fire department has been, you know what, I want to say rightly, really concerned about the placing of lithium ion batteries in buildings, especially given the battery explosions from the unapproved non-UL batteries on bikes all over the place. So I think that I know that they're working on finding standards for them, but that's going to be a big issue about storage.
I think it's a different, Roberta, go ahead.
At least what I'm seeing, and I don't know if this ultimately addresses Carrie's concern, but there would still be a permitting process for energy infrastructure in residence districts that are considered large or above effectively a electric utility substation above 10K to 40K square feet. And
similar to what
so
we
like
have.
yeah,
Yeah.
we have the exact same process that we have now.
Exactly.
And I think that is helpful. What I don't entirely understand, just personally, is how large or what size context, what any of that means. And I think it would be helpful to understand. And if there is a way to ensure that in doing this particular piece of the amendment, that there is the preservation of open space or protections for open space, I think that certainly makes sense to raise that, because that is certainly something that is important to both people's enjoyment, but also there are environmental reasons we want public open space, particularly green space. So I think it makes sense to look at the preservation of open space.
Thank you, Roberta. Moving on to buildings now, which is the next main section they have. And I think with the electrification retrofits, some of them are, I guess, we're going to repeat ourselves with what the solar panels are, because it's the same with the buildings. It's updating rules. So a lot right now, as you know, boilers and these type of energy systems are in the basement, right? They're not seen. It's different when it comes to solar and other green energies. Usually, you need the sun. So they're kind of configuring the rezoning to accommodate for what these new structures will need to obviously be effective. So I think what we just talked about, I'm just reading the outline that I provided, the update the rules in required open areas above the maximum heights, allow more necessary equipment at roof level instead of basement level, update surface area in consideration to setbacks, those type of things. Does anyone have any comments on that? I know, like I said, I think we're repeating ourselves a little bit, but I don't know if we had any strong feelings one way or the other on those. If not, we can move on. These are so this, and you know what, David, maybe you could help with this too, because this is the envelope retrofits. This is going to allow for thicker walls or facades, to allow for insulation to go in, for overcladding or recladding. I don't know if this is going to affect this. I know some people are concerned this will affect the facades or the looks. And David, you could probably speak better to that. I know Carrie was saying that she was pointing out a concern, maybe a 5% potential increase in overall FAR bonus. That might be a land use concern. But David, I don't know if you can add anything to this point.
Yeah, I think what they're looking to do is to give back to the building owners the usable area that would be lost by adding insulation to the interior of the exterior walls. And how the building owners would use that, I don't know. You know, would they expand their buildings? You know, it might not be enough area that it would be worth adding a penthouse or whatever. It seems like kind of a funny thing. You know, I guess in a
It's
way,
minimal, like the inches of the insulation would need, is minimal, you're saying it wouldn't probably affect like a grand
it
moving of.
wouldn't allow, yeah, I can't imagine it would allow you to add a story
Okay.
to a building. But
Yeah.
still,
Okay.
you could add area somewhere and you know, provided your building is already up against its maximum FAR.
Okay, so do we have any red flags on that, guys, or should we move on? Okay, let's move on. So the fix the zone green, I think they're just updating. Let's move to transportation. I'm sure Transportation Committee, I know they're gonna go over this particular point, but so I think this is more from what I was reading, and please chime in, people. This is now really just allowing zoning to allow, right? Zoning to allow charging stations in commercial areas, zoning to allow gas stations, as we've been saying, to include electric charging, allowing to remove fuel pump allowances, all the things that I think we all agree on. It's not necessarily.
Do you know what a fuel pump allowance is?
Sorry?
You know what a fuel pump allowance is?
I think the gas, like that they don't have to anymore. They're removing that allowance.
I saw it, but I don't know what the hell it means.
Yeah, I think it's the gas pump. And I think, like I said, clarifying operators can add EV charging to spaces and parking facilities, such as charge sharing. I don't think any of this is necessarily controversial. I think the point of where they put them and all that stuff is, this is more the overall zoning of that you can do. This is what you are allowed now to do that was not listed before or spelled out before. If we go to the next one, parking flex, automated parking, bike parking. So this one is allowing commercial vehicles to use spaces and have access to chargers in accessory and public parking areas in commercial areas. This is kind of, guys, I think what we were talking about with when we see commercial loading zones, right? Like areas that are just designated for commercial and truck use. Now you would allow, or you could have electric vehicle charging in these areas just for commercial use only. Does anyone have any thoughts or ideas on that? I'm just checking off the boxes as we go down that we pretty much generally agree with. I'm
in favor of charging stations in as many places as we can get them. I think the pushback that we're going to get on that from transportation is that they're not in favor of charging stations in a lot of places, and they're not in favor of cars. So I think our position, correct me everybody if I'm overstating the position that we have, that we favor electric charging stations in as many places as is feasible.
I do think that our joint letter would still stand. Remember, this is just zoning. This is not placement, Marty. So what you were saying would be, like this is, you still have to apply for it. You still have to go through the process of putting it. This is just allowing the zoning to allow that process to go through. It's not saying, this is saying we're putting them in. It's just opening up the zoning for the possibility. Roberta?
So I would push back a little bit on what Marty said, specifically because I think there's an interest in not dedicating like public space, so particularly sidewalks to vehicle chargers. that I saw from the Transportation Committee, and that some of these text amendments would open up private commercial space in ways that they hadn't been opened up before to encourage those cars to charge off street in a non-public way. I think, I mean, I'm sure there are people who disagree, but a lot of us have accepted, you know, whether or not we like cars, that they're here, and getting them physically out of the public realm so we can use the public realm for, you know, biking, walking, you know, maybe even dining in some instances, I think is on net good. And so it's sort of in that vein and getting the vehicles out of the public realm. So I think that transportation might actually be supportive in that regard.
Gwen?
I just wanted to say the same thing. I agree. I'm on the Transportation Committee, and all we don't like is we don't like them on blocking the sidewalks because they're big. Those, you know, all of the poles they want to put in. So there are lots of them and they're big.
Brad?
Yeah, I was gonna echo what they're both saying. I'm still trying to understand. I'm in a city right now with all these cars and they get filled with gas. I don't know why the economic model changes for electric vehicles. I'd rather have a tree than another electric station. So I'm just trying to understand this whole idea. I'm not there. And I was just in London, and the beautiful light posts with a plug coming out where you could charge. I mean, very quiet, but I don't know. I think it's more of a bigger issue. Also, I had my hand up before when David was speaking about the insulation in the walls. I mean, to his point, is it worth to incentivize somebody to do this in a retro building and give them some more benefit of going up top? One idea, does it go to 10%? And on new developments, you know, taking that difference and adding to the top of the building does add up. So I think this is something to think about.
Brad, you're saying like from an incentive angle?
That's right. So why am I going to retrofit my brownstone? That is a lot of work, and for a co-op to do it, what is the benefit? You know, economically besides energy, you know, would it be an incentive to give them a little more room on the top? I don't know. But on a new development, that adds up. That's floors.
Right. Thank you. And just
I did a whole public lobby on like a 60-story building, and they had to add for the, you know, public-private park, and they couldn't get it. And then an old-time developer showed up, and he goes, "You see the in and out, the concrete slab, and then the brick? That's less than an inch. But if you add it up all the way, I mean, the numbers were staggering, right? So this adds up. Is my point.
For the tall builds, yep. Yeah. Just to, I don't want to divert a little bit, but Alan Oster and I, we actually went to Queens today to see the New York City Fleet Fair. And we wanted to see, you know, the new dump trucks or the new school buses, you know, whatever. And I have to tell you, everybody, electric charging stations were all over the place. The new ones, this one, I mean, stuff that we haven't even seen yet was there. So I think we're arguing over the curbside charging. I think they are already, you know, planning for 5 years away or 10 years away and bigger models and level 3s. But anyway, it was quite interesting how the fleet is growing in electrification. But I don't want to move too far away from the topic. So we're okay with those proposed changes. Oh, and I'm sorry. This also, it will create public parking and storage option for bikes and micro mobility vehicles, which I just want to flag something there because I have one little problem with that, which I think it's great. I wish, and I don't know what everyone else is finding in their neighborhoods. So bike storage that they're putting, that is meant for residents or, people to go into a store and lock up their bikes are now being inundated with or really monopolized by like mopeds and commercial vehicles. I don't know if there could be language in zone, that it's, how that's enforcement, right? But I know they say the spirit of it is for people who are riding their bike downtown. They can lock it up because there's nowhere to put your bike. And they want to create more of those bike racks, bike storage, bike parking. I just find, I think it's in our area where I don't know if you guys, where I live, there's a lot of fast food places. So all of these that we thought we were going to park our bikes now are not available anymore, unfortunately, because the mopeds are locking up there and they're staying overnight. Anyway, I don't know if this is necessarily a zoning thing, but it's just something to flag. Roberta?
I think it's definitely a zoning thing. I'm wondering, I think it kind of highlights why this is necessary. There's just so much demand that there truly aren't enough. I don't know who it was who put this out. There's a report most recently, fairly recently, of the top neighborhoods for ordering of delivery food, and you had Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen topping those. And I think I'm sure some of that is related to office and other things that exist in the neighborhood, and it's not just the residents here. But I think that, if we want these amenities, it makes like delivery and having all these wonderful restaurants be able to deliver to us. Like, there's probably some give and take there in allowing the delivery vehicles to utilize the public infrastructure related to bike and micro mobility parking. And it sounds like there just maybe need for more, which I think just highlights why this is so important. And, I'm very supportive of it. Makes a lot of sense to have them biking and not driving.
I'm going to push back a little bit. I saw the exact same article, and I think they were talking about the Upper West Side specifically. And then they went through the thing. I'm going to push back a little bit. And I know this is not part of the zoning, but I think it illustrates the problem. Is these are delivery workers for multi-million-dollar apps. Most of them. These are not like the small mom and pop shops. These are, Grubhub, Uber Eats, Seamless. And we are now, listen, we have so many empty storefronts. This can be another topic for another day. We have so many empty storefronts that these apps or these businesses that are raising tens of hundreds of millions of dollars really can rent out some of these empty storefronts. So their delivery workers have bathrooms, have, you could go when it rains, but instead they want to absolve themselves or wash their hands of saying they're contractors, they're independent. I understand that, but I think to protect our workers, it should be, it shouldn't fall on the public to provide them with spaces and kind of let these apps and these private businesses wash their hands of the responsibility. This is just my personal opinion. The responsibility that some of them have. And by the way, rent out some of our empty storefronts and, have your micro mobility places there. But that might be a discussion.
Why this is such a great zoning text amendment. It would allow them to rent out these spaces for bike parking. And the point is taken. That is fully outside, I think fully outside of this. And, if there are better ways to hold those companies accountable, both for speeding and other violations that their delivery folks are engaging in, to take more responsibility for the people who are contracted to work for them. I am really, really supportive of that. I think that everyone has gotten a raw deal from this except for, the delivery companies. But I don't want to hold harm the individual contractors because they're providing us a service and that they're genuinely not really politically powerful or able to control very much.
Yeah, so I don't think we all have a problem with any of this stuff, right? So far, I think we only have one more. Brad, is that from before? I'm guessing it was. I'm just not sure. Your hand is up. I think it's from before. If not, you could just jump in. The last one is, I think, Marty, you're gonna like this, the stormwater and solid waste part. It's kind of pretty much no-brainers, always allow permeable paving where they didn't have that zoning before. Again, a lot of these are tweaks to allow things that you would think would be, you know, no-brainers, but they're just putting it in the zoning text amendment, so it can be now done if people want to. Allow connected tree beds, rain guards. So Carrie flagged one, the last one, and she is actually right. Alleviate administrative burden for installing green roofs by just moving it so DOB oversees those rules and can regulate that. And she is right. I put this in. It's for non-residential buildings, not for residential buildings. That's for non-residential buildings. So hopefully we'll have all those green roofs popping up all over the place. Marty.
You're absolutely right. I do like it. I think all of the ability and encouraging the ability to absorb water is an important step. So I favor that. I'm missing, however, as you probably know, in the late 1800s, the city began to build sewage systems throughout the city. And the cheapest way to do it at that time, and it wasn't necessarily at that time environmentally detrimental, is to combine sewage with stormwater. That is no longer true. Combining sewage with stormwater runoff is detrimental, and it's going to take a lot of money and a very long time to change that. Missing from these zoning text amendments is the beginning of encouraging the separation of sewage from stormwater. A development is occurring in our district, the Hudson Yards West. I don't know how soon that's going to happen, given all of the machinations of the real estate market, but that happens to be a really perfect place to build separating stormwater from sewage, because it's so close to the Hudson River. The stormwater could easily be piped to the Hudson River, and the sewage could be separated from that. It's going to take longer to separate stormwater from sewage on our major streets and on new buildings throughout the city, but at least some beginning in text amendments, I think, should be happening here.
Okay, Marty, we can work on maybe language if we want to pass on. One thing before I go to David, I do want to mention that there's also, and I thought I had it in this document, but maybe by mistake I erased it. Also, it will, this proposal will address adding clearer regulations for allowing composting and recycling areas, like listed use type of things, which I know that this committee has advocated for. So I think, again, tweaks in the wording, it's more for as an allowance to allow that to happen. Let's see. This proposal will also allow composting and recycling facilities in all commercial districts subject to a 5,000 square foot limit. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that out there because it wasn't in the original notes. David?
If we could just go back one to expanding automated parking regulations, I really don't know what it means. You know, they talk about how parking spaces can be smaller with these automated systems, and they want to be able to extend the same kind of smaller allowance of space for cars to districts outside of the Manhattan core. But my understanding is that zoning has not required a minimum number of parking spaces for a building since like the 1980s, when they switched over to putting a cap on parking spaces, a maximum number. So I don't get the logic of this. Maybe someone else here does, or maybe, you know, it'll probably end up being a question on Monday otherwise.
I don't think
But
it affects us at all. Like, there are parking minimums, they're just in other parts of the city, and then they don't have access to the automated parking regulations, and it would expand it to those areas. That's how I read it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, if there are areas indeed where there's a minimum number of spaces required, you know, I guess this could be a good thing because it would compact that space dedicated to cars without increasing the number of cars. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Katie?
Yeah. What exactly do they mean by facilities in commercial districts for composting and recycling? What is a facility considered?
That's a good question. We can ask that on Monday. Unless
Yeah.
someone knows the answer. I'm good. Well, you know what, Katie, I will look for that if I have it. Matt, do you have another one, Katie?
No, that's it.
Okay, I'm gonna look. Matt?
Yeah, just one quick comment. So one thing I didn't see is, and it was always a challenge when I was at the council, we always had ideas about building more bioswales within the curb to collect stormwater runoff. So it would filter out the pollution, and it was always a very big challenge to do that with DEP. So if there's an opportunity to ask about, would this text amendment be able to allow like the building of bioswales in Manhattan, because it's been happening in other places, but it would be great to see those in the district as well. So just wanted to add that one comment there.
Thank you, Matt. And actually, Sally's not here. She couldn't be here today, Sally Greenspan. But she has been pushing to get a presentation on that. So look next month or the month after. We'll be talking about that a little more, but I will put it in the notes for the guys and gals on Monday.
Leslie, there is an allowance for high performance street beds, and I don't know if that includes.
If that includes bios, I saw that language too. I wasn't sure.
I was just gonna tie those two in case it makes sense when you're asking the question.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Katie Savage.
Oh, sorry. I forgot to put my hand down from before.
Oh, no, I'm gonna say, this is the language. The proposal, this new zoning text would support composting and recycling efforts by adding clear zoning rules for them. Zoning currently does not mention composting or recycling at all. It only allows the closest listed uses, dumps and junkyards, in manufacturing districts. This has caused problems for homeowners and small businesses looking to set up small scale composting or recycling facilities. So it really probably wouldn't affect us as much, but I guess if someone wanted to put,
Yeah, that sounds something more like, things like Lower East Side Ecology Center or Sure We Can, stuff like that, which we don't really have the space for.
Yeah, so I don't know if that helps, that language, but that's what the language they provided.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, is that again or no?
No, sorry, I put my hand down.
Okay, so guys, I think, does anyone
Leslie,
have?
I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brad. Well, Brad, now your hand is down.
I don't know why it keeps going up and down. I'm sorry.
Okay, Brad, go ahead.
I just want to say something to the chairs. When I went through this, I mean, this is almost everything we've been talking about since I've been on the board. So of course there's nuance to all this, but the fact that it's happening now, I mean, it's everything we've literally talked about. So I'm very happy that this is moving forward. So I think as an environmental side of it, this is really good. Just wanted to say that publicly.
I think the committee would agree, right? If we put forward this to our land use friends with some of the concerns that were noted, I think we would agree. I know people who have maybe not, the environmental bent that this committee does might have other concerns, but I think we can agree with that, right? Is that safe to say, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, great. Okay, good. And I want to thank Carrie, you're on this call. You're not on this call, but you're watching the meeting. Do you have anything to add? And I want to thank you because Carrie actually helped some notes from land use before going into this meeting. So I want to thank her. But I'm sure she'll have a lot to say on Monday. Okay.
She actually had her hand up, so I'm bringing her over.
Oh, okay, good.
So I don't really have much to say, except I did not expect to hear my name called out 1,000 times. I was really only
sorry.
Notes on because you asked on what I thought might come up on Monday, and you're all welcome to what will be a very long, I believe, long and a little bit painful Chelsea land use joint land use with Clinton Hell's Kitchen land use meeting. So thanks. I think this was great, and I'm really glad to hear what you had to say. And I think it'll be really helpful when we write the letter. So thank you.
Carrie, we were just through a joint committee meeting, which was long, but we came through it, and it actually, you know, at the end, it wasn't so bad.
Those
So
of
you
us
get
that
through it,
have
it'll
to
be
ask,
good.
those of us that have been charged with asking questions on Monday are very appreciative of your being here, Carrie, because at least you have a sense of what we say, what we said tonight, and no matter how we say it on Monday, you have the spirit of what Brad just said, which I think we all agree with.
I think we do too. I think it's, you know, bits and pieces. So thank you. And I'm glad that I got to hear this, and I didn't think I was going to be on camera, but thank you.
You look
Thank you
great.
for your notes.
You look great. That's fine. It's good you're on camera. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Carrie. So let's move on. Our next and last agenda item before old new business is, so this is just really an update. This is the Pier 92-94 update. I'm sure you guys remember, right? Of Vornado and their plans. Well, their long standing obligation to Piers 92-94 that never materialized, and now they are, I'm just refreshing everyone's memory, they are planning on leasing that land from the city and then turning it into a movie production studio. They came and they presented, we in turn, along with transportation, had our asks, right? I don't know if you remember, we asked for them to complete its obligation regarding the upkeep of Pier 92, which is not the pier that they're going to build on. It's the pier directly south of it, that pretty much has been just rendered. I mean, it's just kind of decrepit now. If anything's going to be built on it, it really needs a total overhaul, which is very expensive. We asked for solar panels or any green energy systems to power this new structure. And I remember, if anyone remembers, they said they couldn't do that because the solar panels would be so heavy and the strengthening and supporting structures wouldn't hold it. So they said no to that. And then we said, well, fix the supporting structures. We asked for the promenade to follow all the way around the pier. I don't know if anyone remembers, it went it kind of went directly on the west side and then stopped. And we asked if they would continue it to connect to the greenway, or at least out to where the highway is. And then also, since this use is marked as a production studio, we expect there'll be a lot of traffic, including large production trucks. And we requested a bike path and pedestrian improvements be made so it could redirect traffic in a safer and more user-friendly way, which they didn't. That actually, I think they seem to agree with. I don't know if I should characterize it like that, but they seem amenable to, I should say. So the lease is out, or I shouldn't say out. I have to say our chair, Jeffrey LaFrancois, went down the other day to look at the lease. So this was the parameters. You have to look at it in person. You're allowed to go in a room for 90 minutes. You cannot take any photos of the lease, but you have 90 minutes to take down as many notes as possible about this lease. And Jeffrey was saying it's about 164 pages with over 50 pages of exhibits. So I have to give kudos for Jeffrey for writing quickly and going through as many pages as he could of this lease. The final public hearing on this will be May 24th. And the comments on this lease, which I will go over some of the points, will come from exec. So we're not expected to have a letter come from WPE tonight. Transportation is going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Exec will talk about it. And the letter will be one that comes out of exec that will go to full board. But this is the update on what it is. So it's an 80+ year lease, and that includes renewals. So it pretty much is our lifetime. And well, you know what? I'm not going to characterize it. I'm going to put out the facts, and then you guys can discuss. So the landlord, which is the city, according to the lease, will be responsible for the pier encasing, the bulkhead repair and the replacement, the pier deck repair, and the extensive fendering work. That will be all the city's responsibility. There will be a 7-year plan for additional work, also the city's responsibility, which includes encasing all the pier piles and bulkhead replacements. So that's that. I talked about some of the, I guess, the neglect where fines were piling up, or at least some financial responsibility. In this lease, the landlord, the city, acknowledges that any fines levied until this point, the tenant is not responsible for. So that goes away. Let's see, the rent, which is, oh, I'm sorry, they will not, I want to double check this because I have to check with Jeffrey, but we'll confirm at exec. I believe the promenade is not going all the way around. They do not have to do any greenway or traffic improvements. The language in the lease says that, I just want to get this, that it's not required, but expected to be delivered in a good workmanlike manner. So the lease does not require them to do what I talked about, the bike path and pedestrian path connection there. The wording of the lease says that it's expected to be done in a good workmanlike manner. And I know there will be some people on exec that are going to have a great issue with that wording. Let's get to the rent, shall we? So, okay, the first 5 years, the rent for this space, the base rent will be $900,000 a year to rent out Manhattan waterfront property. And then in year 6, it jumps to $1.2 million, and then it escalates about $100K every year for 5 years until year 86, when it reaches the maximum in 86 years of $2.8 million. It is not tied to inflation. It is not tied to any market index. It breaks out, I don't know if any real estate people are here, it breaks out to roughly $4 to $13 a square foot. I'm going to say this again for Manhattan waterfront property. So those are the main points. I don't know if anyone has any comments. I'm sure if Lowell was here, his head would explode, but I don't want to characterize that. But Katie, go ahead.
First question, why is this lease so secretive? And then to me, this is feeling like, so what they're saying is the city is responsible for all of the repairs on the actual pier structure itself before Vornado builds their production studio on top of it. So that makes absolutely no sense to me, considering the deal that the Intrepid got from Hudson River Park Trust said the Intrepid was responsible for all of their bulkhead maintenance and management and all of those repairs. So if the Intrepid, a nonprofit organization, can be tasked with all of those repairs, why can a commercial property not be tasked with similar repairs? It just doesn't make any sense, considering, you know, like you said, with how little they're paying in rent proportionally. This seems like a massive giveaway to Vornado, and I just don't understand how this is happening again.
Katie, to your point, you may or may not remember, we actually cited a lot of the Hudson River Park Trust agreements when we talked about this one. And we specifically pointed out the Intrepid, and there were some other points, and said if Hudson River Park Trust can do this, which is run by the state, the city should also take note and hold their leaseholders, I guess, accountable for the same, right? Or at least write it in the lease or consider it. And you're right, it was not done in this case. Marty.
What Katie didn't mention is that the fines have gone away. Vornado has had control of this pier for, what is it now, 15 years? Is that the number? Something like that? And they should have been maintaining it all along. So there's a lot to get angry about what's going on. And my own question about it is, how do we express that anger? What is it that we have to do to push back? Vernado has been stonewalling for 15 years on this property, and now they're getting away with it. Give me a break. Do we have to obey the open meetings law? Do we have to behave like we're responsible people? Why don't they?
Does anyone else have any comment on this? Katie?
I just want to also add that it's incredibly crazy when the city is facing such budget deficits and all of that, that we would be giving such a deal away to, we can't afford to do, we can't afford to fund libraries, but we can afford to do very, very expensive bulkhead work. That type of marine work is very difficult to do, and it's incredibly expensive, and there are not a lot of people who do it. And I know this from my experience just as part of Manhattan Community Boathouse, in how the trust expects us to maintain a lot of those things. And we've had issues with our peers that the park's not able to fix because nobody wants to do it. So if they can't find people to do this work, how do they expect, the city to go about this and spend massive amounts of money for a large real estate company?
Roberta?
I don't know. Is it the lease is with EDC? Okay.
That's who negotiates.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm sure that there are speculative answers, but if we asked EDC why the lease terms appear to be so relatively favorable for Pier 92, is there something that I don't understand or that we're missing as to why those conditions appear to be different for Pier 92 and Bonito than they do for some of the other tenants?
Well, I know that the tenants are, you mean tenants along the
park.
Of the park. Well, they're dealing, other tenants are dealing with Hudson River Park. They're negotiating, and EDC is a different total. This is an outlier situation, at least for us, because most of our riverside, right, our waterfront is controlled by the state, controlled by Hudson River Park Trust. Maybe their negotiators are, I'm not going to say, whatever, they negotiate.
If we were to have a position or a letter on it, I think that I speak for myself, but I imagine there are other folks who agree that this appears to be significantly better than for other park tenants. And it does not, I don't think it makes sense to absolve Vornado of particular responsibilities that are typical of Hudson River Park tenants. Just because they've negotiated a lease with EDC. My hope would be that some of the things that have been required of other park tenants would be standard in this lease. That I think that would be my personal belief.
Thank you, Roberta. Katie?
Beyond the Intrepid, was anything with Pier 57 cited about this? Did Google have to do anything with Pier 57's pilings before expanding that space, or was it already okay?
I'm not sure, but I can double check. You mean there's another point of reference?
Yeah, because I think that's another, like, if we're looking at large scale areas of the park that need to be, maintained by outside organizations, I think it would really be the Intrepid, and then Pier 57, and even Chelsea Piers. What does Chelsea Piers do, or what are they responsible for? Little Island was completely rebuilt, so Pier 54 is demolished. But I think looking at Chelsea Piers, Pier 57, and the Intrepid to see, what their responsibilities are, kind of make it seem like this is a standard across the board. So why is this specific property getting a different deal?
Don't forget that Pier 57 doesn't have pilings; it has caissons.
Ah, okay.
I would, if I may go a step further. I am totally, I cannot believe this deal. This is such a sweetheart deal. This is such a sweetheart deal that I cannot believe. Let me backtrack. why the city is married to this one particular developer. Why was an RFP not going out to evaluate the market price for this property? Why, or I don't know, is EDC afraid that no one's, if Vernada was gonna walk away, there would be 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 developers behind them that would take this land and that would maybe do it in such a way that would be more responsible to the community, be more equitable as far as the breakdown of cost. I really can't come to terms with this, this deal. I also can't come to terms that the rent is so low and it does not, and we're talking 86 years. They are married to a price point, $2.8 million, 86 years from now. We don't know what that's going to be worth 10, 20, 30 years from now. I always say this. I think the city undervalues its best assets. I think the city is undervaluing its asset of this beautiful potential of waterside Manhattan real estate that I think there would be so many others would die for. And I understand there's an economic side of the development of a production studio that is very enticing and very attractive to the city to bring jobs in. I just don't think that would be, that would disappear if someone else came or another developer came and maybe there was a competition or some sort, an RFP at the very least. But that's what I'll say, and I'll save it for exec. Katie.
Is it possible? I mean, I know, the whole Penn Station redevelopment situation is a little bit more focused on the state, but it is in the city and there is city land. Could this potentially be like a consolation prize to Vernado for that whole development deal kind of falling through or something like that? Is there any potential connection there?
That's interesting. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
I just feel like all these things end up having to be connected. Like you can't look at them in isolation. You have to look at everything Vernado is doing with the city to kind of get an idea of how this plays in with the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. I just think we see it over and over and over again. But anyway, so I just wanted to give you an update on that. I don't think, listen, I think we are in like mind here. I'm assuming that maybe I shouldn't, but I think there will be enough concern at exec that a strong letter will go out. That's just my feeling.
Is there a legal action involved in this? I don't think the community board has the capacity to do legal actions, but it seems to me that something nefarious is going on.
So, the final public hearing will be May 24th. That's a public, but I think you're saying like, as far as a group bringing some sort of action to dig deeper. I don't know if that's a community board avenue. But we can bring it up. Any last comments on this or ideas or anything?
Leslie, could you just clarify who actually approves the lease, and is it this?
So EDC it's under city jurisdiction. It's not state. It's EDC. It's a city agency, right? So EDC negotiates. They're the ones that are in talks. When we had our meetings or our requests, it would go to them. When we asked for an RFP to go out, it would be to them. They would have that power to do so. We have been, though, when I say we, Community Board 4 has been in contact with elected officials to highlight what's going on here. Hopefully we can connect with the mayor's office to highlight what's going on here. This seems nothing but it really another sweetheart deal that it just seems terrifically undervalued.
So there's no like formal engagement or requirement that anyone listen to anyone in the city listen to anyone.
Correct, just the public hearings.
Okay.
Just, it would be public hearings. I mean, but as you see, I mean, like Katie mentioned, I mean, it's a pretty clandestine, it's like a secretive type of process so far as, I mean, Jeffrey might as well have had like a cloak and like a flashlight going in there, like trying to unearth like some, back room file cabinet. It's not even online, the lease. So anyway, I guess we can wrap this up. Now, I guess we can move to old, new business if anyone has anything. Nothing, no old business, no new business. Katie?
Did we ever hear anything more from the borough president's office in regard to the smart bins for composting?
Katie, you know as well as I do, how many emails did we send to the borough president's office?
A lot. Well, I know,
I must have sent 503.
yeah, I know, we had talked with Jesse and that, I spoke with Marissa Yanni and she said, it's not a community affairs thing, but we need to talk to the people who deal with, what is it? The Bureau of Recycling, to get the, they're the ones managing the compost program. So, I mean, initially those 150 new smart bins were supposed to be rolling out in the spring, and we are now in the spring. So it'd be a real shame if we are unable to get it, especially when there's a new pilot program going on in West Harlem for the containerization that's much larger than what we had here. They also already have curbside composting and a wealth of smart bins. So it'd be great if we could at least get smart bins down here.
We can definitely reiterate the request, right? We can definitely do that.
Sounds good. I'll see if I can get an actual contact name for who to speak to on it.
Yeah, and I'll send another email and I'll talk to Jesse also in the office. Because the responses we're getting are, okay, we're working on it. Let's see what what they do, where it's going to go. And our response to their response is, well, that's why we're telling you, we're asking it for it to be here. We don't want to see where it's going to go. We are saying we want it to go here. And make a hard ask, a hard request. I'll follow up, Katie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, does anyone have any other comments? Guys, good luck if you guys are participating in the Monday meeting. Carry our torch brightly.
You are welcome to come, Leslie.
Listen, so many people are going, you don't even need me. Anyone have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you very much, David. Good night, guys. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm going to go. My daughter's at the Yankee game. I'm going to see if I can see her on TV.
Night, everyone.
Good night.